The first wine in our 2024 cellar release program is our 2019 Assyrtiko. We're the first people outside of Europe to plant Assyrtiko in 2012, and this 2019 is predominantly from our Lodge Hill site, with a few other sites in there as well. 2019 was when we started to play around with a bit more barrel and lees work, and it's really coming through in this wine as a 5-year-old. Now, aromatically, it looks very similar to Clare Valley Riesling with some of those flinty, toasty notes coming through. But on the palate, that signature saline brininess that we get in our Assyrtikos distinguish it from our Riesling. Still nice and fresh, plenty of citrus, starting to get a little bit of bottle age weight and flesh. 5 years old, really in a delicious zone. The Lodge Hill site was first identified by Grandpa Jim back in the 70s, and he purchased the property in 1977 and went about planting Riesling on the south-facing slopes. This site runs along the eastern side of Clare on that ridge line of slate that runs all the way through from Polish Hill River up the east, continuing on to the north. And this site sits around 500 metres, so elevation, that slate soil, and really cool nights. It's our windiest, breeziest site with the highest diurnal temperature, which is perfect for Riesling. Lodge Hill Riesling, as a 10-year-old wine, is absolutely in the zone. This 2014 is super, super expressive, really jumping out of the glass. And those classic, lots and lots of toast, flintiness, but that lime curd character, almost lime brulee, which is really, really interesting. As Lodge Hill generally is, really explosive, plenty of drive and citrus, but also that secondary character coming in, some toastiness, as I said before, and a little bit of creaminess on the palate. 10 years old, absolutely in a sweet spot, and also Lodge Hill Riesling providing absolutely great value as well. The Armagh Shiraz is the pinnacle of our portfolio and comes from the vineyard right behind me, which was planted by Grandpa in 1968. The 2014 is an exceptional Armagh vintage, and at a recent vertical that I did with Andrew Kayard, he thought the 14 was one of the best vintages we've made. As a 10-year-old wine, really in a beautiful spot. It's still super young, super vibrant, but just starting to develop a little bit of that secondary character, some sage, some almost like Kinato herb character, inky dark, but with this elegance and finesse that we find in the best vintages of Armagh. This really high-toned orange oil character, which I think is always a signature of the best vintages, and you see that in 14, you see it in 16, 18, and 21 as well. When the fruit is ripe, but not overripe, there's still tension into the fruit, and it evolves in this kind of orange oil citrus character, which is really beautiful. Now, 14 is during the transition of Armagh over the last 10 years, where we're picking a little bit earlier, but also the vineyard and the soil management that we've been doing has allowed us to pick much healthier fruit without the dehydration. So only 14%, no American oak in this wine, and larger format as well, 300, 500 litres as well. And also when we backed off the toastier Burgundian oak and moved towards finer grain Bordelaise oak, which was a big step change in the Armagh. And you see that in this wine. The oak sits well and truly behind the wine, and all that beautiful dark purple fruit, pastel fruit, coming to the fore. The McRae Wood Shiraz is named after Duncan McRae Wood, who we purchased a property over my shoulder out at Armagh from in 1964 and planted our first vineyard. In 1992, we developed the McRae Wood Shiraz as a baby brother to the Armagh using declassified parcels from Armagh. Over the years, the McRae Wood has evolved a lot, and now it's from a handful of our vineyards around the Clare Valley, some still from the Armagh vineyard, but also from Spring Farm, where the altitude and elevation is a bit higher and the fruit is a little bit more elegant and higher toned. 2016, as an 8-year-old, is really moving from primary into some of those secondary, tertiary characters. Really interesting phase of its development because it has that brightness of red fruit and violets that we see from the higher altitude parcels that go into this wine, some of the darker fruit that we get from Armagh, but also evolving into some of those secondary, a little bit of, not quite leather, but that sort of savoury, almost a little bit of charcuterie in there. Kind of that lavender, which we normally associate with the cooler climate areas of Shiraz that go into this wine. Nice. It's got a 1 foot in the traditional dark fruited structure concentration, but also there's this elegance and finesse about this wine as well. It's during the transition of our winemaking with McRae Wood, where we're wanting to retain a little bit of the nostalgia of the old, but also bring the wine more in line to where we're going with our viticulture and winemaking. Really delicious. It's going to be a crowd pleaser because it has the weight and some concentration. Only 14% alcohol, so it's not a big wine by any means, but this is going to definitely be a crowd pleaser, this wine. This 2017 St. Clair Dry Red Cabernet Malbec is an exact replica of the first wines released by Grandpa back in the 1960s, where we were known as St. Clair Cellars before we became Jim Barry Wines in the 70s. The original wines were blends of Cabernet Malbec, Shiraz Cabernet Malbec, from the vineyard over my left shoulder out at Armagh. Block 1 being Malbec, 2 Cabernet, and Block 3 Shiraz. And those 3 varieties were the foundation of our winery. And they're still the varieties that we're planting today, and they're still the future of Jim Barry Wines. In 2015, we decided to recreate the original label with the original blend, and this is the 2017. At 7 years of age, it's really, really in a nice spot. The 2017 is a very cool vintage, very classically structured claret style of Cabernet Malbec. Medium bodied, there's some high tone cranberry, a little bit of raspberry, definitely in that high tone red spectrum. A little bit of lavender, thyme, those kind of high tone herbs. And even a lick of char-grilled capsicum, which is from that bottle age. A really interesting, almost idiosyncratic example of Cabernet Malbec, but something that I'm really infatuated by. Medium bodied at best. This wine is driven on a really fine beat of tannin, really prominent high-toned acidity which drives this wine. And once again, red fruit, lots of cranberry, juicy cranberry acidity, a little bit of graphite, capsicum, char-grilled capsicum. That's kind of sweet character you get from char-grilled capsicum. Really, really interesting, exciting, traditional old school style of Cabernet. Yum. The Ben Burney Cabernet Sauvignon is named after a small village of Ben Burney, around a kilometre behind me. First settled in 1863 and comprised of around 15 mud huts and a Roman Catholic church. They were looking for copper back then, which wasn't very successful here, but it was around 40 k's away in Burra. When Jim purchased the property from Duncan McRae Wood in 1964, he planted his first 8 blocks. And the Ben Burney comes from Cabernet Sauvignon, which is block 8, planted in 1964. Now, this wine now is only released as a cellar release wine because we find that after 10, 12, 14 years, it's really harmonising and coming into its own. The 2012 is a really, really cool vintage, a classic vintage in the Clare Valley, great for Riesling, great for Cabernet, great for Shiraz, really an all-round vintage. And it's Sunday lunch in a glass. It's bouquet garni of rosemary, of thyme, of bay leaf. There's a little bit of mintiness, which is typical of Cabernet in the Clare Valley. A little bit of now I've mentioned it, almost like a little bit of lamb fat character, but I think that's just because I'm mentioning sort of Sunday roast lamb lunch. But a really beautiful wine. It's still got the primary red fruit, a lot of purples and violets, some lavender, a bit of sage. And medium bodied. This wine's only 13.5% alcohol. The oak is fully integrated, adds a little bit of clovey spice in there, but definitely sits behind that fruit. A nice plushness as well to the wine, and that's why we release it with some age. As a young wine, the tannins on this can be quite four-squared and firm, but with age, those tannins soften and that plushness of fruit comes through. Beautiful acidity running through this wine. A really, really nice example of 12-year-old Cabernet in a more elegant, graceful form.